if you're in the keto or the carnivore space, you've probably heard about the LMNT scandal. Everybody's been talking about it, and I've got a guest today who can help shed some light on this and kind of get to the heart of the matter, get to the truth of it. And then also I've got another guest who has done another crazy experiment. Of all the things that he could possibly experiment with diet-wise, he decided to go vegan. I don't know why. We're going to find out. So I've got with me today Robb Wolf and Nick Norwitz. Hello, gentlemen. Welcome.
Hello. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you guys again as well. I've met you, Robb, a few years back at a conference. I can't remember which one, but it's been a minute. So good to see you again.
And good to see you.
I talk every 10 minutes, so he's like my little brother. Okay, first of all, let's talk about this. Everybody in my group calls it LMNT, but LMNT, the electrolyte powders. So Robb Wolf is the co-founder and part owner in LMNT that makes the electrolyte powders. And so the controversy, the kerfluffle is that LMNT kind of advertised itself as no dodgy ingredients. If you look on the website, it says it's got 4 milligrams of maltodextrin, which for those of you in the know, you know that's just long chains of glucose molecules stuck together, kind of like a starch. And then it turns out all of a sudden that there's 2 orders of magnitude more maltodextrin in LMNT, anywhere from 250 milligrams, maybe even up to as high as 550 milligrams. That's what was reported, was 550 milligrams. And then I think LMNT issued some kind of release and said, well, it's between 250 and 550, which is what I would say too, if I owned LMNT and we were having some drama. Robb Wolf, tell us what's all this about? How did this happen? I've got some thoughts and ideas because I'm friends with other people who develop a product like LMNT and then try to scale it up. And my guess is that's where this happened. And maybe it was not even, you maybe were not even aware of it, but just, that's my opinion. Just tell us the story. How did this happen? And how did you guys find out? What are you going to do about it?
Well, there's a long arc to this. And Nick, are you guys comfortable with me doing the full long arc on all this? 25 years ago, I nearly died from ulcerative colitis, similar to Nick. And you guys know how disastrous that situation is. I'm about 170 pounds right now. I got down to 125, 130 pounds at the low ebb of all that. And I happened to be eating a vegan diet at the time. I was in grad school, burning the candle at both ends, living in Seattle, basement apartment. The idea of vitamin D wasn't on my radar at all. And when I finally got it checked a couple of years later, it was 12. So it's amazing I didn't have even more things going on, but I was in a pretty rough state. As you guys know, conventional therapies in that direction are surgery and immunosuppressant drugs. Neither of those go well. And so I was in a pretty desperate state. And it's a long story how this idea of a keto, paleo type diet got on my radar, and it might be effective for dealing with the ulcerative colitis, but that's ultimately what happened. And I was sick enough that it was kind of like, well, I'll do anything. Like if it kills me, this will be a mercy killing at this point because I don't really want to go on with this. And it was magic for me. Like it put 98% of the issue into remission. I went on to be able to perform at a pretty high level. I decided that I didn't want to follow kind of a medical path and ended up co-founding the first and fourth CrossFit affiliate gyms, have been active in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And although a low-carb diet was great for a lot of the gut and autoimmune things that I had going on, I just had no low gear at all when it came to like anaerobic activity. So I struggled with that. I would try introducing some carbs, cyclic low-carb diets, different things like that for nearly 20 years. And then I just kept poking around online, trying to find some way to make a low-carb diet support a high intensity activity lifestyle. And I met this guy, Luis Villasenor, who's the founder of Keto Gains. And these guys were just, they had amazing body composition transformations. They had a couple of women that were performing in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at the world-class level. And I pinged him. I'm like, hey, what do you think's going on with me? Like, what do I need to do? And he looked at everything I was eating. And he said, well, I think you're deficient in electrolytes, specifically sodium. And I said, well, I salt my food. I'm probably good. I'm a biochemist. So, of course, whenever you reach out to a world-class coach, you don't listen to them on the first go. And it took a good year of Luis wearing me down. And he finally did something really smart, which he said, why don't you weigh and measure everything you're eating, everything you're taking in? And I would like to see you at least 5 grams of sodium per day. And when I did that, I was at less than 2. And so he said, okay, let's try this experiment. Why don't you go grab some pickle juice before you work out next and take about 8 ounces of that and drink it over a 20-minute period. Don't just shotgun the whole thing at once and tell me what happens. And it was a miracle. Like the lights went on and, I felt really good working out. And it shouldn't be too surprising because every nerve impulse, every muscle contraction is driven by sodium potassium pumps. So if you're deficient in sodium and potassium, sodium in particular, things aren't going to work that well. And I had never really thought about the nature-basis of fasting, like this low carb state, low insulin environment, just shedding sodium like crazy. So I looked at what Luis was already doing, which he and their community was very savvy to this need for sodium. This was a new thing for me. And this is maybe 7 years ago, 6 years ago. So we put our heads together and we knew that the community that we served, this kind of keto, paleo, low carb community, when I looked at what was affecting people, the common, brain fog, lethargy, cramping, stuff like that, I was like, man, just about everybody is probably sodium deficient. So we put together this free downloadable guide and we called it Keto Aid. And it was how to make your own, electrolyte mix, this much sodium, that much potassium, this much magnesium, stevia, water, shake it up and go. And we just put it on our respective websites. And within about 6 months, we had 500,000 downloads of this thing. And we weren't sophisticated at all. Like we weren't using it as a lead magnet. This was years before LMNT was even a thought. But what we started getting was a lot of feedback from people. Feel way better. These electrolytes are great. But man, when I'm traveling, 3 bags of white powder are not a favorable thing for TSA. Have you guys ever thought about like doing some sort of a stick pack or like a scooper thing or something like that? And so the whole thing was born of just recognizing that there was this huge need in the community for more electrolytes and really people asking us to develop something. So we sat down, started looking at formulations. And when we put this thing together, initially we had a citrus flavor, kind of classic Gatorade kind of deal. And my wife, being smart and in this space for just as long as I have been, she said people are going to have concerns around stevia and a host of other things, including the maltodextrin, which at that point, our understanding was that we had 4 milligrams of malto per stick pack. That's what, when we had talked to our suppliers, that's what was communicated to us. And at that point, I made a decision that we weren't going to put that on the package, but we would disclose that via customer service and also via our blog. Fast forward maybe 2 years, 2.5 years, and every year or so, about every 18 months, we do an internal audit where we talk to our suppliers. Hey, are we getting our salt from here? Are what are the specs on it? Stevia, et cetera. And when we got around to the maltodextrin, they said, no, you guys have 400 milligrams on this. We were shocked by the change, but it's also, for context, 400 milligrams, for a point of reference, a teaspoon of sugar is 4,000 milligrams of glucose. 400 milligrams is a tenth of a teaspoon, but clearly a significantly different amount. We put that on our blog. We put that on the blog immediately. We did not put it on the packaging. And the reason why for that is I see a lot of people major in the minors. They get totally wrapped around the axle of this minutia. And I just wanted people to motor forward and use some sort of an electrolyte product. And this is where we've always told people, if you don't like what's in LMNT, the flavored formulas, use the raw. If you don't like what's in the raw, formulate your own. We have had from day one how to make your own homebrew formula around that. So that was kind of the baseline. So it's interesting, some things that happened after and really that drove all this thing forward. There was some discussion online about LMNT and maltodextrin. And one of our co-founders, Luis, chimed in, and Luis is a great guy, but he's not intimately involved in the day-to-day running of the business. And he said, we don't have maltodextrin in the product. And that was absolutely false.
Yep. That was a tweet in reply to a tweet from Dr. Tro on Twitter.
Correct.
Yeah, and he said there's no maltodextrin in elements.
Right.
Pretty blunt about that.
Which is totally false and incorrect. The irony a little bit around this is when everybody kind of correctly, said, no, you guys do, is that they referenced our blog, which listed the maltodextrin. So we weren't hiding it, but also I wasn't fully transparent on the front end about the content of maltodextrin in the product. In retrospect, I probably shouldn't have done that. Post-COVID environment, I'm a kind of neurotic about full disclosure and people being able to make absolutely complete informed consent. Nick and I have talked about this stuff, and even though my intent may have been good in the beginning, one of my favorite things is the path to hell is paved on good intentions, and this is a primary example of that. And so we had this situation where we had what we thought was one level of malto, and what we discovered when we dug back through all of the communications with our suppliers is that this was being communicated on the back end on our suppliers as 0.4 grams of maltodextrin. And then that got turned into 4 milligrams of maltodextrin when it got communicated to us. So originally on their back end, they were saying 400 milligrams of maltodextrin as kind of the average on this stuff. That got miscommunicated. And then, when you overlay one of the founders saying we have no malto, I don't know how you could, I couldn't go back in time and create a situation that would look worse on this. I would really have to think about okay, how could we look more nefarious, trying to hide information and all that type of stuff. The reality is that on the legal side, we didn't have to disclose this stuff at all. I did want transparency, but I also didn't want people freaking out about something that I really just don't think is metabolically significant. But in retrospect, that was a poor decision on my part. It's kind of like you guys were talking about, relationships a little bit before we started recording. And if you damage a relationship because of dishonesty, it is very difficult to claw that back, almost impossible. So I should, and this is 100% my decision. The whole company followed my lead. I'm kind of like the main, scientific advisor for the company. So this was my call and my responsibility. And again, whether I had good intention on that in the beginning or not was not the appropriate way to handle it.
Yeah. And I think it just came across to the average consumer as fishy.
Sure.
You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
I mean,
Rightfully
that's what
so.
I would have thought. And if I didn't have any experience knowing people like you and a good friend of mine, Robert Sykes, makes the keto brick. And I can tell everybody watching this, Robb Wolf does not make LMNT in his kitchen. He started out making it in his kitchen, the prototype, 100%. But when you're selling as much powder as they're selling, you have to farm that out to a corporation that does that for a living, that formulates these things. And very often they have liberties with what they add, how much they add to make the product meet guidelines. And I suspected that the packer or the manufacturer had just said this needs more maltodextrin. It's still not going to be enough that you're going to have to disclose it. It's still a minor amount. We're just going to add it. That's what I figured happened, because that's a similar thing that happened to Robert Sykes with the keto brick, and that's why he still makes them in his barn, because he's like, I don't trust you guys. They've got tolerances. They can say, well, it's less than this amount, so it's okay. We're going to tweak that, and not even necessarily tell Rob or Lewis. And so this was, but the manufacturers told you guys this right up front. It was just almost miscommunicated because they wrote it in a funny way, 0.4 grams instead of 400 milligrams.
Yeah. And so you asked a great question also, what are we going to do about this? We
Yeah.
brought in a guy, Jeff Brahms, who is 20 years at Garden of Life. He was their chief counsel, so he handled all their like litigation and legal concerns, but he's also their master formulator. And so he's an expert in supply chains, really an expert in vetting out the QA/QC process. Like, is something a non-GMO product or project? Is it organic compliant and whatnot? And so he's going back through every single item in our supply chain, every step of our supply chain, and we're getting validation that, is this thing really what we're, what we're asking for? Is it really what we're getting? Is all that stuff accurate? And I'm not entirely sure how this is going to play out. The goal may be to get something where every single run ends up on the blockchain, and you get a box, it's got a QR code, you scan it, and then you can see the certificate of authenticity, the GCMS, the mass spec, the whole deal on that. I'm not entirely sure how that's going to play out, but the goal is that we're going to have a degree of transparency and also insight into our formulation and our manufacturing process that is second to none in any of this kind of supplement-based industry. And also, that's, I think, the thing of like trying to make good with the people that feel like that, we've been dishonest with them. But there is another piece to this, which kind of goes into a little bit of the majoring and the minor piece, just in that people don't understand the complexities of manufacturing. So like we already have mocked up a video where we've got a 50-gallon drum of sodium chloride, potassium chloride, stevia. How do you take that, spec it, get parameters on the particle size, get it into a machine, have that, shake that stuff out, and make 10 million sticks a month that are all uniformly consistent? There's a lot more to it than what would meet the eye. And part of this, the goal, it may be a perfect cure for insomnia. People may watch it for 30 seconds, like fall asleep, and it solves their sleep issues. But I think that there needs to be an appreciation. There's kind of multiple things going on. We have a broken food system. We have a broken healthcare system. There's a lot of nefarious activity. And then there's a flip side to this, that like anything that we do from a manufacturing perspective, particularly as you scale, there's some wiggle that has to happen in that. Like there's if you just want things to come out of a machine properly, there's certain things that you need to do. And even, I don't know that people may not even be aware why we have maltodextrin in the product at all. We use natural flavors, which natural flavors are a whole other bugaboo for people, and they'll lose their minds over that. But if you want a flavor in it, it's either artificial flavor or natural flavor. There are no super natural flavors, at least nothing that I've found. And within that natural flavor story, you're usually extracting something from a fruit or a vegetable or something like that, gets concentrated down. And for what we do on the stick packs, it has to be freeze dried. And then it's such a tiny amount, you have to agglomerate that with something like maltodextrin, or other people use acacia fiber. And that is the carrier. And let's say that 400 milligrams of maltodextrin probably has 4 micrograms of flavor. It's a tiny amount. But the 4 micrograms of flavor is so tiny, if we were trying to just directly add that to the stick pack, one stick pack would have a mountain of it, one stick pack would have none of it. And so in order to get consistency across the whole manufacturing spectrum, you need something like maltodextrin. And in our early iteration, we tried some other things and they just tasted awful. Like the thing that ended up tasting best was the maltodextrin. And something that we are going to revisit is to see if we can use any other carriers, besides maltodextrin. There are some things that have a lot more of a health halo around them, and we're definitely going to vet that out. It's possible we might do a couple of flavors that have a more amenable carrier to it. But there is also a reality that what we've seen from the feedback among the communities that LMNT serves, the keto carnivore scene was absolutely up in arms, pitchforks, ready to go. Once you took one step outside of that community, nobody cared at all. And there's this other piece of the story, which if you shift over to kind of a high carb athletic scene, which I'm not a high carb athlete, but people consume maltodextrin by the kilo,
Sure.
and so those are some of the things that we're trying to do. That's some of the transparency into it. You guys might have some other questions to help clarify some of that stuff. Happy to try to tackle any of that as best I can.
Nisha and I just used the raw, the unflavored, and we've both used that for probably a year now. I think that for the vast majority of people, except for the people with the worst genetics in the world, like me, who fatten super easily and who consume multiple packs a day, this is not an issue. During the summer, I work out on the farm, and sometimes I'll drink 6 or 7 packs a day in water. And I know typically I lose weight during the summer because I'm working so much. But this last summer, I stayed up 5 pounds, and it's like, I didn't care because I'm, pretty close to my ideal body weight, but it was like, well, that's weird. And then I thought, I wonder, because I always wonder about the cephalic phase insulin response to sweet taste on the tongue, right? And that's what I thought. I'm just going to start using the raw. It has no sweet flavor at all. I didn't even know about the maltodextrin. And when I converted over to the raw, I was still drinking 5, 6, 7 packs a day because I was sweating probably 3 gallons out there in the 95-degree, 100% humidity Tennessee sun. And that 5 pounds came off in 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And so I don't know if that was anecdotal, coincidental, but I've just stuck with the unflavored since then. And I would encourage anybody, if you're worried about the maltodextrin, if you think you're that weird 1 in a million person, just use the unflavored, or like Rob said, make your own. I bet they still have on the website. You can make your own, and it's literally 3 cents a serving. Right. If you make your own. Now, I have one more question, and I'm going to see if Nick has any questions. You said that you've got natural flavorings in there, and as you know as well as I do, because of recent political events, natural flavorings on an ingredient label is, I predict, going to become a red flag, because everybody knows now you can hide how many hundreds of things in natural flavoring, and it's typically in the microgram range, but could you not just put, instead of natural flavorings, could you not just put lemon extract or kiwi fruit extract, or just don't use the term natural flavorings, put whatever it is on the pack? I don't know if that's even something you could do or not.
Oh, this may be a poor analogy, but did you guys just see that the FDA made Kirkland, like the Costco Kirkland, destroy like 80,000 pounds of butter? Because the butter wasn't labeled contains milk.
Contains milk, and yeah.
A lot of what we're dealing with are actually these really vague, but at the same time, weird FDA rules. And so on the one hand, they look like they're being really precise, but it actually creates a huge amount of ambiguity. And so, like our citrus, to my understanding, it has some tangerine, it has some orange, it actually has a little grapefruit in it. That varies a little bit. Like there's another thing, and we've done really, like, if people want to learn more about natural flavors, if they just search LMNT natural flavors, like we do have an exhaustive blog on this. But I think about like D-limonene, which is this thing that's in citrus fruit, but it's also in pine trees. And within natural flavors, you might get D-limonene that's an extract of like pine bark, and you might get D-limonene that is an extract of like a lime or a lemon. It's the same molecule, it has different sourcing, right, but at the end of the day, it's kind of the same item. So,
and that would be up to your manufacturer to pick whichever one probably was cheaper for them, whether it was pine bark or whether it was actually the extract of a grapefruit. And so you might not even have control over that.
Well, and it's not just cheaper. There's seasonality to these things. Like, not, so if something comes in season, you can get some of these natural products from this, and there's a shelf life on these things. So like, do you want your product to run out of this stuff? So like, there's a seasonality, there's sourcing both, domestically and foreign on these different things. I don't want to turn this into a political podcast. I'm actually pretty stoked about Robert F. Kennedy getting in and potentially doing the stuff that he's doing. I mega appreciate what he's up to. I also think that saying natural flavors is one of the primary driving factors of like our healthcare epidemic is misplaced. I think broadly hyperpalatable, highly processed foods, yes, but and natural flavorings clearly play a role in that story. But I think that we have to be really careful about what things we go after because we have limited time, limited resources. Nick, I don't know if you want to talk about seed oils on this one too, but we're in like some synergy on that. Like I'm the guy that's not entirely freaked out about seed oils broadly. I think that, you have a Costco muffin that tastes amazing and it's 1,400 calories and people blame just the seed oils in it when it's like, well, you had 1,400 calories and you ate 300 other meals and you overate your caloric load by 1,500 calories on the day. Can we just only, ascribe that to seed oils? And I know the pitchforks are really going to come out there, but it's going to be an interesting process navigating this. I would love to be able to be more precise with like the way that we label this stuff, but a lot of this is just up to FDA vagaries as to how we can or can't do this. The cool thing is my understanding thus far, a number of these initiatives that are underway, there are going to be governmental portals where people can write in, hey, I suggest we do X, I suggest we do Y. So I'm definitely going to be thinking about this so that we can hopefully navigate the story and get much better transparency to the consumer, but also not hamstring ourselves in a way that it's like, well, it's almost like living in like Eastern Bloc Germany, where it's like, well, we all have raw and flavored, and that's the one, the one flavor we have because like all natural flavors have been taken off the table. Or the flip side of this is that you might create a perverse incentive where people are more incentivized to use artificial flavors because you have less need to disclose on that. So when these people have been in such a furor to go after what's going on with natural flavors, if you create a perverse incentive there, then food manufacturers are going to say, well, okay, we're just going to use artificial flavors, and I don't know that we're really moving things in a favorable direction that way. So we have to be really careful about the way that we tackle this, or I think people could inadvertently make some things worse, would I guess be the way that I would put that.
Nick, what do you think about all this?
Yeah, so the reason I'm here in this discussion is when this LMNT controversy blew up, kind of as a new content creator, I had people reaching out to me like, Nick, you have to cover this. It's super viral right now. And I started to look into it and I'm like, really? Like, why is this like a viral story? Like, there are moments in social media where something arises. Like I just did a video recently on this big science paper. It's like multi-decade study. And it was shocking. And the data were really cool. And I was excited to cover it. And I'm looking, 2 calories in an electrolyte pack? Like, why are people worked up about this? And the angle I ended up taking, because I did end up covering it, was the social psychology angle, which I find very interesting. Not the question of, is this 2 calories of maltodextrin physiologically relevant? I think more or less we can agree, except for people who might have like some sort of weird autoimmune reaction to the maltodextrin, which might be a population, it probably isn't metabolically relevant to most people. Like even people with diabetes, I don't think 2 calories of carbs is going to be a big deal. But the question that arose to me is like, why are people so worked up about this? Why are videos going out getting hundreds of thousands of views about this topic? And what I came to, and ended up being kind of the focus of my coverage, was this issue of how valuable transparency is, especially now in the post-COVID world around nutrition and metabolic health. And I think the lessons to be drawn from this case study on LMNT are the value of transparency. And so what I ended up doing is doing my coverage, but also reaching out to Robb because I wanted to get his 2 cents. I thought it was fair to platform that. And Robb can tell you, I mean, he saw my video. I didn't go light on them. I didn't try to defend them. I said, here are the issues as I see it. And the focus was people were enraged, not about the maltodextrin per se, although we can get into that because there's definitely an element of groupthink, and we'll talk about that in my talk about the vegan keto study and stuff like that, because you can kind of manipulate that to your own ends. But that aside, I think people were just really upset at a lack of transparency. And it was interesting to talk to Robb and get his perspective, because as we just went over, I think the sequence of events, when I hear it from him, is understandable. In fact, he actually went out of his way to provide some degree of transparency on their website when he could have just brushed it under the rug. Like legally, he could have been like, well, this is just a flavor carrier and I don't actually have to disclose it, so I'm not even going to put it on the website. And if he had done that, the ironic thing is they wouldn't be getting any flack because nobody would know. But he did disclose it somewhere, but didn't go all the way to put it on the package label, which again, he didn't need to do. It's interesting to see how people blew up at that. And also was really interesting to get Robb's, hindsight 2020 like thoughts on, if I were to do this again, I probably would have gone, this is my understanding, Robb, correct me if I'm wrong, but out of my way, even if it would have affected like our base a little bit, our sales base a little bit, to put this on the label. I didn't realize how valuable transparency was to people. And I think
especially in this day and age, Nick, you're exactly right. Especially in the low carb, paleo, primal, keto, ketovore, carnivore community, all these people feel like they've been misled.
Yeah.
By the doctor, their dietitian, the FDA, Kellogg's, General Mills Post, they've been misled. And in many cases, they're not wrong. And so they got a hair trigger. And when you hear some whiff of indiscretion, whether it's relevant or not, they're like, Et2 element?
And I think, there's a parallel here to something that I forget which one of you alluded to it before, but not wanting to freak people out. Like, Ken, you're a healthcare provider, and there are a lot of drugs with side effects that sound severe, but they're like, say take something like teriparatide. It's a bone anabolic agent, and there's a black box warning about certain cancers. But it's like at an absurd dose shown in rats, and then 1 in 2,000 rats get it. So are you going to really talk to your patient about it? Some things you have to, but some things you're like, look, the absolute risk is so infinitesimally small. Why even burden them with it? And then you make the executive decision not to disclose that because you think it's for their greater good. And I can see the argument there. And I think that's something that probably Robb did with respect to the ingredients label. I think what we're learning now is while one can make an argument either way, people value transparency so much that in the world we're living in today, my general advice would be to always disclose, and very high level, whether or not you or I think 550 milligrams, so half a gram of maltodextrin, 2 calories and carbs is metabolically relevant. And generally, I wouldn't think it would be. It's not up for us to decide. It's up for the end user to decide. Whether or not they're as scientifically or medically informed, I think it's an individual's right to know what they're putting in their body and decide for themselves. And I think broadly, if we look at the LMNT scandal, so to call it, as like a case study in that, that's what we all learn. And I will give props to Robb. When we had this conversation, I think he was not at all defensive. And it's like, you learn through these experiences. And that's kind of what I thought our combined lesson was. So I think there was something valuable to learn from this hoo-ha. For me, that was what I learned. What do you think, Robb?
I agree. And I really appreciate both the kindness on the one hand, but also the holding of feet to the fire on the other. And just internally as a company, we've faced different challenges at various points. And what we've tried to be is resilient. And, if a mistake was made or, some challenge was met, hopefully we can come back from that stronger. And that's where my hope and goal is, that this deep dive into our manufacturing, sourcing, and then being able to get that to people in a really detailed, immediate way is going to raise the standard for everybody. Like my goal, I'll be honest with you, is that we do such a good job on this that it's going to be difficult for anybody else in this space to do what we're doing. We really want to elevate the standards on that and make it easy for people to fully get a sense of where we are as a product. And then they can make an informed decision. Okay, LMNT isn't for me. It's got this thing in it, but it'll be clear no ambiguity about it. We're always willing to take questions. If somebody's like, well, why are you guys doing X, Y, Z? Then we actually have human beings that run our customer service side, not AI. So we answer them with actual living, breathing meat bots and take a lot of pride in that. But yeah, we are hoping to come back from this and be much stronger in that transparency and ability for people to fully understand what's in the product so that they can make an informed decision.
And I've actually talked to my followers about this in our private community, and I'm like, if you guys think that this is a worst case example, I promise you, if we get full disclosure on those keto cakes and keto pancakes and keto syrup and keto all the crap, I guarantee you the amount of maltodextrin in those things is going to dwarf the tiny amount of maltodextrin that's in LMNT flavored powders, and no telling what all else is in there. But I think you're on the exact right course, Rob. And I have to tell the viewers, I've known Robb Wolf for over a decade. Known him. We're friends on Twitter. We've been friends on Twitter for years. I have never detected a hint of dishonesty or trying to trick people. It's just not, I don't think it's part of his nature from my personal, just viewing him existing in my realm. I've never got a whiff of any kind of dishonesty like that. So I think he's telling the truth. I think that's exactly what happened. And like I've said many times, you don't need something sweet all the time anyway. Just get the raw, use the unflavored, grow up. You don't need something sweet in your mouth every second of the day. And, that hurts some people's feelings, but that way, because I looked at the container, I think it was the citrus. I poured the powder out and I poured the powder from a raw one out. There's significantly more volume of powder in the flavored. And I suspect that's the maltodextrin used as the carrier for the natural flavors. But I'd never done that experiment until this controversy came out. And I'm like, wow, there is a lot more powder in this one than there is in the
bulk of it is actually citric acid for the tart flavor. There's a lot of citrate in it. Yeah.
Citric acid. Yeah. But there's significantly more powder. So I just use the unflavored. And that's what I told everybody. Use the unflavored and you won't have to worry about it. Because I promise you, they're not going to put anything in the unflavored that doesn't need to be there, because they'd be wasting money if they did.
Yeah.
Now, let's turn the tide and let's talk about this insanely stupid experiment that Nick Norwitz, PhD, soon to be MD, did to his own human body. Nick, what did you do?
I spent a little bit of time on a vegan diet, keto vegan diet in particular.
And how did you do that?
I ate a lot of, leafy greens and tofu and added oils, olive oil, macadamia oil, sesame oil. And to kind of create a bridge between the conversation we just had, because I want to have some continuity, I'll describe what I did, why I did it, and what the results were. But I want to put it under this larger umbrella that we're talking about social media communication, like groupthink and emotional responsiveness. Because the conversation we just had with Rob, what I was trying to tie it to is like how emotionally responsive the community was and why they were that way. And that's something that, as content creators, we can take advantage of, predict, and manipulate, and do so for purposes that can be anti-constructive or can be constructive. So I want to just highlight that that's where I'm going to get to. Now I'll tell you what I did. So for a while, me and colleagues, Dave Feldman, Adrian Sotomota, and others have been studying this lean mass hyperresponder phenotype, the phenotype where when lean athletic people go low carb, their cholesterol goes through the roof. And this is a really important thing to study, because I don't think I need to sell the viewers of your channel on the idea that therapeutic carbohydrate restriction and ketogenic diets have incredible clinical utility, some of which has been described, some of which is just being described with respect to various neurological diseases, autoimmune conditions, et cetera, et cetera. This is a really powerful metabolic tool, yet the boogeyman remains cholesterol, because in some people, cholesterol goes through the roof. So understanding why this happens and the risk associated with it is a really important area of science. And it's an area we've been studying for some time. And we've done quite a lot of work, including interventional trials, meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials. We have over 10 published papers on this topic. We put our blood, sweat, and tears into doing the research the right way, quote unquote. But there's a barrier insofar as, the conventional or certain conventional circles like to either try to sweep it under the rug or discredit it, not have the conversations around the literature. So, it's interesting to watch Dave Feldman's journey in retrospect, where it's like he had an observation and people are like, well, to be taken seriously, you need to do the studies. And he fundraises, does the studies, and then, there's no follow-up game. People try to ignore it. And so what can you do in that situation? Well, you can twiddle your thumbs and say, this is the way things are. We need to wait for 5, 10, 20 years to go by for the research to accumulate, and then we have a conversation. Or you can be impatient and passionate like this 20-something scientist and be like, no, we're having this conversation now. This is important. And then the question arises, well, how do you force that discussion? And if you've been following me or you're getting to know me, you're going to find one thing I like is to be what I call productively provocative. And I've been exploring different ways to force conversations around difficult, confusing, curious things in science, especially around our research on lean mass hyperresponders. And my first attempt at this was the Oreo versus statin study, which we published. I presented at academic conferences. And then since that point in time, I've been doing other N=1 experiments. So the most recent one was a vegan keto experiment where I went from an animal-based, mostly carnivore ketogenic diet to a vegan ketogenic diet. Now, on the vegan ketogenic diet, I decreased my saturated fat over 4-fold. I increased my polyunsaturated fat, including consuming some seed oils in the form of sesame oil. I increased my fiber intake from 0 to 21 grams. I held protein constant, and by virtue of it being a vegan diet, I dropped my dietary cholesterol to 0. So I have now described all the levers that one could pull to lower cholesterol based on a conventional approach. And there's something I haven't told you, though. I pulled another lever. And that sole lever, my prediction was, would overpower all the conventional levers. And rather than lowering my LDL, it would increase my LDL. So that was the hypothesis. Big picture, it's taking conventional ideas and pitting them against new ideas and saying, do these new ideas overpower the conventional ideas, fiber, saturated fat, and polyunsaturated fat and dietary cholesterol? And in the end, it did, where on the vegan version of the ketogenic diet, rather than the animal-based version, my LDL actually increased by 14%. And that's just a provocative finding. Now, to present the spoiler, the thing I did was my calories were much lower on the vegan diet. So what ended up happening is I got even leaner. And as explained by our lipid energy model, you can go read the paper or see the coverage of that. If I lose body fat and my fat cells become smaller, there's more drive for my liver to put out VLDL particles, which end up as LDL particles, and you get this lean mass hyperresponder triad. So again, lipid energy model versus conventional ideas. What won? The lipid energy model. So big picture, this was about me trying to present a metabolic demonstration, similar to Oreo versus statin, similar to 720 eggs, which went far more viral, in order to provoke discussion around this phenotype. Now, I will pause for questions about the physiology from either of you guys, but then I actually want to talk about how people responded and was I trying to manipulate people and to what end, and whether or not that's ethical, because I think this is a conversation we actually have to have quite transparently to plan a theme. How
long were you vegan?
1 week. I could have done it longer, but actually I couldn't because it was not particularly comfortable. And to that point, I will say, people have made the comment in this experiment and other experiments that the body takes time to adapt. And that's true if you're making a claim about long-term outcomes which I'm not trying to do. In addition, one of the emphases, I don't know what the plural of emphasis is, I think it is emphasis, of our research is the acute dynamic nature of physiology. So by analogy, if you have a Coke and your blood sugar spikes, that was in response to the Coke. You know that's rapid. But people think about cholesterol moving glacially. One of the things we're showing is this is a lipid trafficking system that moves dynamically. So actually, the focus in part is on acute responses. And
I love it. I love it when you do these studies, Nick, because I promise you, I've talked to thousands and thousands of patients, and then also lots of people online. The average person walking the street thinks that your LDL is set in stone, pretty much. The only thing you're going to do to lower that is to go vegan or take a statin or Repatha, a PCSK9 inhibitor. That's the only thing that will move your total cholesterol and your LDL cholesterol. They don't realize that they change minute to minute based on hundreds of variables. So I actually love it that you're doing these little studies, because I think that it, and I guarantee you there are 30-40% of primary care MDs and DOs who, if you ask them before you did this experiment, I'm going to go on this diet, and explain it to them, what's going to happen to my LDL, they would literally have to flip a coin. They would have no idea what would happen, even though you gave us the wild card in the description. Anybody who remembers their physiology at all will go, oh, it's going to go up, because, but the average primary care doctor thinks that your LDL is pretty much set in stone. They have no idea, because I have people in our group, they go keto and their triglycerides drop from 700 to 105.
Right.
And their primary care doctor's blown away, like, how the hell? That's impossible. You and I know very well, you can drop your triglycerides or raise your triglycerides hundreds of points in 2 or 3 days. That's easy to do. But if you don't think about this physiology constantly, you forget all that stuff. So I love that you're doing this, not just for the patients, but for the doctors who are paying attention.
Well, the intent is to create an expectation in one direction and then break that expectation. Like, that's where learning occurs. I was talking on a prior podcast before about like how to select, the scientist you want to follow. Like when you're identifying like a true scientific thinker, what are the criteria? Is it they have a PhD or an MD or a published papers? I don't think so. I think the number one thing you want to look for is how people respond to when their expectations are broken. Do they get defensive, or do they go, whoa, what happened there? Because when your 100%. Expectations about physiology are broken, that's where you learn. And I will just point out, if you want to know about like the response from academicians around my N=1 experiments, they're the people on social media you'll see who are going to have strong opinions and get defensive. But behind the scenes, these have been incredibly valuable. In fact, this is why I still do them, to have academicians at top institutions or top ranked institutions, Harvard, Stanford, Yale, Oxford, approach me and say, wow, this was unexpected. I kind of know your background, so I assume you have a broader game here. I went down the rabbit hole and, oh crap, there's some legit physiology. Let's do some studies together. So now we have pretty big studies that are rolling out, and also clinicians that are aware of our models and implementing them with patients because of what appear to be goofy stunts. And to that end, I really try to audit honestly what the major impact is of these experiments, because to some extent, they're kind of intended to be, you could use the word misleading or provocative or manipulative if you want. It's like they're supposed to be clickbaity. That's the point. We have to accept engaging in a space with respect to scientific communication where you need to have the engaging package in order to bring people in. And then it's your responsibility to build off that engaging package to have a message with some degree of depth. But nevertheless, you do need to appreciate the currency of the realm and play that game a little bit. Yep. And so that's something I try to be pretty transparent about, because for me, being a young person who's like, look, I spent the last decade plus in academia training how to, do science. Now, how to build a story around science and make it interesting to people, I think is a whole nother skill set. And I think people are going to play games with your emotions. They just are. Whether or not they tell you is another story. And I think one thing I try to do that I don't see a lot of other people doing is being upfront about that. Like, you watch the vegan keto video, I open with, here are the results. Now, I literally say this to the audience. I'm like, audit your emotions. Are you curious? Is your mind blown? Are you angry at me if you're plant-based? Like, take note of those emotions, because I'm trying to provoke them. Now we're going to walk through. Now I want you to return to what your emotional response was. Think about why you had that emotional response, and then what I'm actually trying to do here and what I'm saying. Because what you can guarantee, and what you can predict, is people are going to layer on their confirmation biases on either side. So I'm going to say things, and people are going to read other things into them. If you watch the video, I say nothing with respect to value judgments on plant-based diets. I don't say good or bad. Nothing with respect to value judgments on cholesterol. But based on what people are, or even seed oils, I place no value judgment. But people are going to place value judgments on them based on their confirmation biases. I can predict that. I'm not stupid. I'm anticipating that. And that's going to feed the comments. It's going to feed the algorithm. And it's going to amplify my message. I'm not trying to be opaque about that motivation, but in spewing their emotions into the space, they amplify the message. And at the end of the day, it gets people more curious. It reaches the people I actually want to reach. Like, I don't care about the people that have their confirmation biases and are spewing emotions in. If they want to troll me, then fine. They're just flaming the fire that I want them to flame.
That's right.
And do I want that to be necessary? No, but it's a reality that I will play into. And what I'm trying to tell everybody is, this is what I'm doing. I'm trying to some extent, manipulate your emotions. Just be aware of that, because I think in and of that self, that's kind of a meta level, because everybody's doing it to you, not just me. I'm just telling you about it.
No, I love that. And I think you're on exactly the right track, and you're such a good doctor. I love how you're thinking about the entire viewer, just like you should think about the entire patient, their emotions, their psychological reaction. A great YouTuber who has just a tiny YouTube channel called Veritasium said that you don't want your titles to be clickbait. Clickbait implies that you didn't deliver as promised. But Nick, here's the term. You want to be click worthy. And that's what I think you're doing. That's what I try to do. Like this video, I'm going to title it "The Element Controversy and Nick Norwitz Goes Vegan." And everybody's going to be like, oh my God, that element thing. And also Nick went vegan. What the hell? They're going to click on that, but then they're going to learn something. And so that's click worthy.
If you want to really make it click worthy, Photoshop my neck to be extra skinny. It's already a little bit skinny for the number one.
I'm going to put Robb Wolf behind bars and you with a pencil neck. That's what's going to be the thumbnail.
I mean, I kind of like, I'm a skinny person by nature. And the number of it's like, we know people jump to massive conclusions based on like little things. So if somebody sees Harvard and just like an unfavorable angle of me, I'll immediately get like, you Harvard vegan shill pencil neck. And I'm like, all right, fine.
Harvard carnivore pencil neck. Get it right.
Anyway, but it hasn't broken yet so far.
Did you have any tummy grumblies with your week of plants?
If you watch,
because I know your stomach history.
I love Brussels. They don't love me, and there's a little like green fart cloud that pops up. Yeah, no, it made me upset. You know, here's the truth of it. Again, not placing value judgments. Like, I don't think things like Brussels or like leafy green vegetables are unhealthy. I think if you look at the data on balance for the population, they're more healthy than not. But there are some people like me, and I probably like Rob, who are just super sensitive. And so for our own purposes, we won't consume them. And I think one thing we can do is try to, like, you know, as communicators, differentiate that. Like, I can speak objectively on, or try to, on like the value of, you know, certain fibers for the population. At the same time, say, because of my medical history and sensitivities, this isn't something I do, but it's something you can do. So yeah, no, it upset my stomach. Doesn't mean plants or vegan diet is even bad, but it upset my stomach. Yeah. Now, you could argue that's because I have terrible microbiome dysbiosis from the IV antibiotics I got as a kid and the junk I ate during my teenage years that maybe we will fix in the coming years, maybe we won't. But the bottom line is I am where I am. So
I think anytime, and I try to hammer this all the time, anytime you hear somebody on YouTube say, fill in the blank is bad for you. You have to immediately, as the viewer, talking to the viewer now, you have to say for whom and compared to what. That needs to be the first two questions. Does he mean blanket? Brussels sprouts are bad for every human on the planet? And compared to what is Brussels sprouts bad for you? Because, it's especially in the carnivore world, I'm constantly trying to get people to meter their tone and choose their words wisely because it gets so militant. And I'm like, for whom compared to what? So if you compare Brussels sprouts to ribeye, then for Nick, ribeye is better. It is better than Brussels sprouts. Brussels sprouts are bad for him. If he had to eat Brussels sprouts every day, you would not want to be in the room with him, I promise you. But that doesn't mean they're bad for everybody.
No, for sure.
Just to tie all this together, Dave Feldman first publicly presented the lean mass hyperresponder at a Keto Gains convention that I was also speaking at. And then it was maybe a couple of years after that, I got in and looked at this from just an energetic accounting perspective and arrived at, the lipids should go up in this scenario because of the lipid trafficking. And the funny thing with that is I ended up agreeing with the lipid hypothesis, and a number of people in the keto carnivore scene got super angry at me because I arrived at it from a different angle than the normal approach. I'm not entirely sure what happened on that, but it was interesting.
And I'll tell you, I actually use in a practical way the hacks and the tricks and the N=1 experiments you do, Nick. I've got several people who they have to get their LDL cholesterol checked, and if it's too high, their health insurance premium goes up. And so I practically I'm like, okay, here are your options. You can either do the Dave Feldman loaf bread and fat-free turkey, or you can do the Nick Norwitz Oreo cookie. Either one is going to drastically drop your LDL, get you under where you need to be. Then you can go back to eating a proper human diet. I've probably had 100 people who use that practically to save hundreds of dollars a year. So you're doing good for people you never even met just by allowing them to artificially lower their LDL to trick their health insurance company.
That's the thing, though. It's not artificial. It's not a lab error. It's a genuine. No. I know what you mean, though, but it's like it's a genuine phenomenon. If people took 100%. It seriously, this wouldn't be a loophole you could exploit. One more point I want to make, just to kind of tie this all together around N=1, because you were just talking about your patients. Rob was talking about his experience, and I'm, talking about my N=1 experiments. I want to talk about, I just published an op-ed. You can look it up. It's like the path to N=1 medicine. I dive a little bit into the why of what I'm doing. And I shared the story of my first patient. This is actually somebody I met when I was running my clinical trials over at Oxford. She was a middle-aged French woman with Parkinson's disease. And on top of that, she had some autoimmune issues, some rheumatoid disease, an inflamed hip, obesity, in part because of, one, the medication she was on, and two, that she was completely immobile because of her disease. So she couldn't even move. And after she finished her clinical trial with me, she asked me about helping her on her diet to potentially lose some weight. At the time I was in my early 20s, but I just figured, I'd try to help a friend out. And so we started working on her diet. When I say she couldn't move, I mean, I literally put her in a grocery cart at Tesco's, and we'd roll around, and she would ask questions. We'd pick up, we're talking about nutrition label. She'd ask me about the nutrition label, and I'd have some insights, beyond, what was in the sneaky ingredients, et cetera, et cetera. And what she did is she expressed curiosity and kept on asking questions, and we kept on iterating and iterating and iterating. And what she did was engage in the scientific method. She created hypotheses about things that would work for her. Then we executed on them together, collected data in the form of subjective data, but also objective health data in terms of her weight change. And then non-judgmentally, but with curiosity, said, did this work? Did this not work? And why? And then we created a new hypothesis, and we iterated and we iterated and we iterated. Actually, I should have pointed out, she was actually plant-based herself. Plant-based, low carb in this case, but was plant-based. And there came this moment in November of 2019, I think it was. I got a text from her. It's one of those memorable texts I ever got in my life. For context, she used to be a dancer, I think ballet. I don't know why I pronounced it weirdly, but because of her Parkinson's disease and her other diseases, like she thought she probably could never dance again. And she sent me a text to the effect of, I was just dancing in my kitchen to an old rock song with my kids. And then my husband came home. My husband's name was Paul. My husband came home from London. His jaw was like to the floor because he saw me dancing. We never thought I'd dance again. And then we danced together as husband and wife, had that experience where, it was, her quality of life was so substantially changed in so many ways. And that was not an exceptional, but was a representative case. And since then, I've seen so many cases of people like that. And I know you both have as well. And
that's why I'm a doctor, is for that exact type of story.
And
how can you beat that?
Them all, though, is not a particular diet per se, but I see the success arises when somebody engages in that N=1 metabolic health journey. And I think something we can all get on board with, and something that unifies either our healthcare practices or our stories, is what we want to do is empower people with transparent information and the tools and community to be able to execute that process in their own life and find something that works for them. And if that's high carb, vegan, plant-based, then fantastic. Like, I don't care. But I think we're living in a world where people are pissed off about a paternalistic healthcare system. They 100%. Want transparency. They want empowerment. That's what we're getting from this. And we need a lot more stories like the one I just described. That's why we're having this conversation in the broad sense. At least that's what my opinion is.
I totally agree. Totally agree. Go ahead, Rob.
John Ioannidis, one of the most cited scientists in history. I think there was a time when he was like the most cited medical scientist in the world. He did a piece that basically made the case that aggregative medicine has failed. Like, we've gone as far as we can, taken 10,000 people, 100,000 people, however many, and aggregating and averaging the results. And this may be a stretch, but it's always striking to me. But when we think about the toxicology of caffeine and the half-life of caffeine, for an average population, the average half-life or clearance of caffeine is 8 hours. You have some fast metabolizers that will clear it in 4, slow metabolizers that will clear it in 36. And so when somebody says, is caffeine good or bad for you? It totally depends on the individual. And the average is meaningless. And I think that we've kind of snuck up on this spot where we have opportunities for CGMs, AI, personal interaction, via telemedicine, group medicine, that we can really take a big step forward out of aggregative medicine and do this N=1 kind of citizen scientist approach. And I think that is the only way forward. And the funny thing about that is all that is what doctors used to do practicing clinical medicine. They used to be a scientist every day with each person. Now there was oftentimes some baggage about like, what is the recommended diet and different things like that. But Ken, you and I are older here. And so you and I both remember that, one of the common refrains with TV commercials around a host of different medical concerns was get a second opinion. The second opinion thing is gone now because it's assumed that we have this one path that fits for everybody. And it actually ends up being like the worst fit of any time in history, potentially, that we've ever seen. So it's Nick, what you're doing is awesome. And I think it is the pointy end of the spear in getting clinical medicine back at the forefront of medicine. Like, that really is where the rubber hits the road, is what is the clinical outcome for the individual in front of you?
Yep.
I actually think that medicine is going to flip on its head. And this is a provocative way to phrase it. I like to be provocative, but the whole idea of the RCT being the gold standard is going to die in favor of N=1 medicine. And what I mean by that is just what Rob was alluding to, that, RCTs have their benefits, but they sacrifice specificity because you're taking huge populations of heterogeneous humans and then drawing conclusions based on group averages with large standard deviations, or at least standard deviations. So you can have a statistically significant result that sells a drug where 6% of people benefit, but what about the other 94%? And I made up the 6 to 94% numbers, but you get the point.
Yeah.
What matters is to the N equals 1 is what is the result in the N equals 1. And the fact of the matter is we're going to have more tools and technology to answer that question and develop protocols that are not, derived from RCTs, but are derived on physiology-based approaches by taking large sets of data on an individual. You can do this through what's called multi-omics. So many omics, the ohms, microbiome, genome, proteome. And as we get technology to analyze individuals in that way and get a whole picture, and in fact, a video, when you do the longitudinal multi-omics over time, then you can see with high resolution, you can use AI and machine learning from this, what's going on in this individual and what's upset in them, and how can we target those nodes through metabolic approaches to address the core of their metabolic disease, rather than trying to slam it with a pill. I think that's where we're going. It's actually a lot more scientific and sophisticated than what we're doing now, which I think we're going to look back and think is pretty freaking rudimentary. But
it's much closer to the way that physics and engineering have progressed for the last 200 years.
Yeah, it's going to be cool. I'm super excited. Healthcare is going to change tremendously in the next decade or so. Mm-hmm. I think there's going to be whether or not, upcoming administrations or associated individuals are responsible for it. In the upcoming years and decades, there's going to be a lot of disruption. I'm optimistic we will come out overall better on the other side. Either that or we all die.
I totally agree. And I think whether the current upcoming administration is a part of that solution or if that fizzles like things have fizzled in the past, it's going to move Overton's window to the point where people like you, Nick, and you, Rob, and me, and others who are trying to teach people about real nutrition and real health, it's going to move Overton's window where we can have those discussions. And when Nick says N equals 1, people don't roll their eyes anymore. It's like, no, this is very important. You don't understand this guy. Look at his body of literature based on this. This is a real thing. This is very important. And I think Rob's exactly right. I think it has as much, if not more power than back in the old days when you would go get a second opinion, get a fresh set of eyes. I think the N equals 1, especially when we can start digging into the omics, which we're not there yet. So nobody waste your money on that microbiome testing and the supplements they recommend. We are not there, okay? But one day is what Nick is saying. One day in the future, we'll be able to literally watch all your omics and just know, oh, you're a special snowflake. You are a zebra, not a horse. I need to treat you differently with pharmaceuticals, nutraceuticals, or number 1, diet. We need to make the following dietary modifications for you because you're a special snowflake.
Yeah. I have one more provocative comment. It's tangential, but I think people will respond well to it. You can give me your thoughts. But I've been observing how people talk about me and the labels that are applied. I'll throw out a few. Things that I associate with citizen science, N equals 1 science. Some guy called me some dude in a tweet. And what I've seen in all of those is, by certain individuals, they're seen as diminutives or something negative, like an insult, calling me some dude when then somebody else points out he has a PhD and he's at Harvard, blah, 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 blah. I love it. And I think what people are missing, especially people that want to associate their egos with brands and degrees, is what we're talking about now broadly, this incredible frustration with paternalistic medicine, credentialism. And it's truth be told, yes, I do have academic training, and to the extent that they're practical for me to leverage to get a message out there, I will use the brands that are associated with me and the degrees I have. But at the end of the day, what people want, and this is what people are missing, is the relatable person that can just communicate good ideas to them, irrespective of where they're coming from. Yep. And it is dangerous to overlook that truth. Because when you do so, you corrode the trust and credibility that you think your credentials might bring. And people are missing that. People are missing that when they're saying like, oh, citizen science, yada, yada, yada. It's like, I'm an MD, or I'm going to be an MD and a PhD. And like, I am proud to be these other labels, a citizen scientist, somebody that like doesn't want to rest on their laurels.
Yep.
And it's also dangerous. We talk a lot about confusion around like cholesterol, and people say, oh, you're misleading people because you're doing this Oreo versus statin study. Now they're going to think Oreos are healthy. I'm like, I've never met anybody that like has been convinced Oreos are healthy. And I'm not saying anything about like, you know, high LDL being safe. I've never said that. Where people get pissed off, and I think this is actually where the danger is, which people are overlooking, is while any given individual might not have, you know, mastery of the literature, they can tell when they're being condescended to.
100%.
So that self-proclaimed expert says, well, I'm an expert and lower is better and listen to me. The person's like, that's overly simplistic. Stop condescending to me. And now I'm going to rebel. And that's what the danger is, in the rebellion from the condescension. And then those people that see the people that are like rebelling, they're like, well, you idiots, you LDL deniers, you might know who I'm referring to there. Like, terms around in like vulgarities. I'm like, you think you're helping? You're creating the problem. You're creating the rebellion that then you're pretending to stand up against. You're creating the dangerous behavior by being paternalistic and condescending.
Yes.
And I don't think people like take a moment to stop and think about the social psychology of scientific and medical communication in this day and age, and how complex this ecosystem is, which is why I'm having so much fun playing and talking with it, because it's actually like I'm laying out these ideas. I'm trying to do it pretty transparently. It's not that complicated when you stop to think about it. But how often do you hear people stop and think about it and just like reflect on the social psychology around these phenomena? Because when you do, it's like, I'm not a psychiatrist. This isn't that hard to dissect, but it's very predictable, very manipulatable, and you're going to be manipulated. So you better start thinking about how people are doing it, and also how you can engage in a productive manner.
Yep. And doctors, we have many doctors and nurse practitioners and other mid-level providers who watch this channel. And I'm telling them constantly, the patients have had enough. The patients are headed for the exit. And if you want to stop that stampede and actually help those people, take off your white coat. And by that, I mean symbolically, stop being at this 3 levels above looking down. People are done with that. They're sick of it. They're tired of it. There are so many people who've watched my channel, have listened to Rob, read his books, watched his videos, and Nick is coming to the front. They're like, dude, I've literally transformed my health watching YouTube videos for free where 10 doctors, a primary care and 9 specialists could not help me at all. When people hear something like that and they know that person and they look at them like, no, they're a new person. They literally are transformed. They're going to doubt mainstream medicine. And in some ways, I'm happy about that and glad, but in other ways, that's bad. And so we've got to meter our speech. We've got to think about our words. And you're doing a great job, Nick. Keep doing exactly what you're doing, because I can tell you're literally considering every word in your script. And that's exactly what you have to do, because if you say the wrong thing, it could mean somebody's life somewhere. And so I commend everything you're doing, Nick Norwitz and Rob. Like you saw the comment, we're all very appreciative that you came and talked to us. I think everybody understands now the element controversy and understands that it maybe wasn't as big a controversy as we thought it was, and we're led by some gurus to believe it was. And I want to thank both of you gentlemen for coming today. Any parting words?
Just grateful for what y'all are doing, and just being a kind, thoughtful people who also are willing to hold some feet to the fire. I think that is it's a rare characteristic these days. And I was having a conversation with a good friend of mine, John Frankel, who's a Harvard PhD, also black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, that's brought Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to Korea. And he and I had a conversation, and there's a distinction between being kind and, what was it? How did he say? Gosh, it's failing me now, but
weakness can look like the same thing. Is that what he said?
something to that effect, but it's just not telling people the truth, even though when they kind of need to hear it, and oftentimes just also being open to the fact that we don't know. Like Nick, you've mentioned this stuff before around like the lean mass hyperresponder. You make a case that this probably is a very different metabolic state with regards to lipids and lipidology than, say like an insulin resistant state where we have elevated lipids and elevated blood glucose and some other factors. But you also are very transparent and we don't know yet, and I mean, that's a big leap to take. And it's also harder, I think, in many regards to plow a path in the social media environment by not just running to a polarized place. A nuanced position just, it doesn't quite get the same clicks. And I think that you found an interesting middle ground here where you're able to ask provocative questions, mess with people's head a little bit, which creates a little bit of that controversy, but then at the same time maintain absolutely impeccable integrity around that process. So I really appreciate what you're doing.
Thanks for the conversation, guys. There's a lot of things I could close by saying. I think one thing I'm going to say that I'm going to actually say more for my own purposes than anybody else's is getting into this space. A prominent influencer, who I will not name at this time, gave me the advice that if you want to have longevity and success, in social media, you have to become comfortable with being misrepresented and misunderstood. I actually think that, keeping my focus on promoting the messages I want to and being honest with myself and self-audits, but maintaining that perspective, because some people can be pretty cruel and nasty, has helped me. So I don't know why I'm choosing to bring that up. I guess the flip side of that will be for people to be aware that like extremes are going to be made out of everybody. We saw that with the LMNT controversy. Mm-hmm. Certainly seen that would probably cover just some of the things I do. You can choose to take that at face value, or you can choose to just be aware that things are going to naturally gravitate to polar extremes. And if I could give you one piece of advice for being a fair person, it's like, listen to the words that the people are actually saying and then make your own evaluation. Try the best that you can. And none of us can be completely devoid of bias, but to evaluate the claims that are being made, for what they are. And then, just engage authentically. I think authenticity and transparency are a theme that we're playing on. So I hope we can have more discussions like this, because I think, in the provocative and the uncomfortable, there are a lot of lessons we can always learn.
Absolutely. That's a perfect place to couch a lesson, is right between those two. Thank you, gentlemen, so much. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Ken.